The floor was shaking before I even opened my eyes that morning, and I knew something was wrong. My name is Marcus Cole, and 3 months ago I was standing in a hive city built from black stone and glowing blue veins, guarding a queen who was not human, for a people who did not trust me, on a planet that was not mine. I did not choose this life. It chose me, the way a storm chooses a ship. I had been a soldier once, the kind who followed orders without asking questions, until the day my unit was betrayed by the very people we were sent to protect. After that, no one on Earth wanted me. I was too broken for a desk job and too dangerous for a quiet life. So when the diplomats came looking for someone expendable to send to the Vale Empire as a gesture of peace, my name was at the top of the list. Nobody expected me to come back. I did not expect it either. The Vale were not like us. They stood taller, with skin like dark polished glass, and eyes that shifted colors when they felt strong emotion. Their hive city was carved into a mountain, lit by strange fungus that glowed soft blue in the dark, and every hallway smelled like rain on stone. When I first arrived, the guards looked at me the way you look at an insect that wandered into your house, something to be tolerated, not welcomed. I was brought before the throne on my second day. That was when I first saw her. Queen Sharin Vale sat on a throne made of fused crystal, her robes the color of a starless night, and when she looked at me, I felt like she was reading every mistake I had ever made. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was steel underneath it. "So this is the human they have sent me," she said. "A soldier with no army, a guard with no kingdom. Tell me, Marcus Cole, why should I trust my life to a creature I do not understand?" I did not have a clever answer. I told her the truth instead. "You shouldn't trust me," I said. "Not yet. Trust is earned, not given. I am here to do a job, and I intend to do it well, whether you like me or not." Something flickered behind her eyes, gone before I could name it. She waved a hand, and the guards around her lowered their weapons, just slightly. "Honesty," she said. "That is rare in this court. Very well, you may serve as my shadow, Marcus Cole. Try not to embarrass your species." That was the beginning. For the first few weeks, my job felt simple, almost boring. I stood behind her chair during long meetings I barely understood. I walked 2 steps behind her through hallways lined with nobles who whispered in a language full of clicks and low tones. I learned to read her body language before I understood her words, the way her shoulders tightened when she was displeased, the way her eyes brightened faintly blue when something amused her. The other guards resented me. They were Vale, bred and trained since birth to protect the royal family, and they saw me as a symbol of weakness, a sign that their queen needed help from outsiders. Their captain, a broad-shouldered warrior named Vethrak, made his feelings clear the very first time we stood post together. "You will not last a season," he told me, his voice low so the queen could not hear. "Humans are soft. Humans break." I did not argue with him. I simply did my job, day after day, and waited for him to be wrong. The nobles were worse. Vale society was built on old bloodlines and older grudges, and many of them saw the Queen's peace treaty with Earth as an insult to their pride. I began to notice the way certain nobles gathered in corners, lowering their voices whenever I passed. I began to notice one name that came up again and again in those quiet conversations: General Threx. He was the commander of the Vale Home Guard, a war hero from the border conflicts, and the most respected military voice in the Empire. He was also, I would later learn, the Queen's most dangerous enemy, though at the time I only knew him as a tall, silent figure who watched her with eyes that gave nothing away. One evening, after a long council session, the Queen dismissed her other guards and asked me to walk with her through the private gardens beneath the hive city. It was the first time we had been truly alone since my arrival. The gardens were strange and beautiful, full of glowing plants that pulsed gently like slow heartbeats. Shireen walked slowly, her hands folded in front of her, and for a long moment she said nothing at all. "You wonder why I chose peace with your people," she finally said. "It crossed my mind," I admitted. My father spent his life at war, she said. He believed strength meant never bending. He died believing that, in a battle that gained us nothing but graves. I do not wish to bury my people for pride. That sounds like wisdom to me, I said. She turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than a queen. I saw someone tired, someone carrying a weight too heavy for one person to hold alone. Not everyone agrees, she said quietly. There are those in my own court who would rather see me fail than see this peace succeed. I trust almost no one within these walls, Marcus Cole. Then trust the one person here who has no reason to lie to you, I said. I am not Vale. I do not care about your old rivalries or your bloodlines. I care about doing my job, and my job is keeping you alive. She studied me for a long moment, and then, quietly, she said something I did not expect. Perhaps that is why humans make interesting allies, she said. You lie less to your enemies than my own people lie to their friends. I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing. We finished our walk in silence, but something between us had shifted. I was no longer just a guard standing at her shoulder. I was starting to become something else, though neither of us said the word out loud. That night, lying awake in the small chamber they had given me near the royal wing, I found myself thinking about home for the first time in weeks. I thought about the men I had served with, the ones who did not come home, and the promise I had made myself after that day. Never again would I stand by and let someone I was sworn to protect fall because I was too slow, too careless, or too afraid. I did not know yet how soon that promise would be tested. Over the following days, I began paying closer attention to the whispers in the halls. I did not speak the Vale language fluently, but I had learned enough to catch fragments, and fragments were enough to worry me. Words like weakness and human filth, and more than once, the name Threx, spoken with a kind of reverence that made my skin crawl. I mentioned it to Sharon during one of our evening walks, and for the first time, I saw real fear cross her face. Threx commands the loyalty of half my home guard, she said. If he moves against me, I do not know how many blades will stand with him, instead of with me. Then we prepare, I said. We do not wait for the storm to arrive. We watch for it. She nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Doubt about her court, doubt about her own safety, and though she never said it directly, I think even then she doubted whether anyone, even her human guard, could protect her from an enemy wearing the face of a trusted general. I promised her I would try. I did not know then how far that promise would take me, or how much it would cost. I only knew that something dark was moving through the halls of that glowing mountain city, and that soon, very soon, it would come for the Queen, who had begun, quietly and without either of us noticing, to trust me. The days that followed felt like the calm before a storm nobody else could see coming. I trained harder than I ever had, studying every hallway, every exit, every guard rotation in the palace. I learned the names of the loyal soldiers, and the names of the ones I was not so sure about. I watched General Threx from a distance, noting the way he stood a little too still whenever the Queen spoke of peace, the way his jaw tightened whenever her name was mentioned in council. I told myself I was being cautious. Looking back, I know now that some part of me already understood the truth. War was coming to that mountain, and when it arrived, I intended to be standing exactly where I had promised to stand, at her side, no matter what it cost me. The trouble started with a feast. Every year, the Vale held a ceremony called the Ascension Feast, marking the day the royal bloodline first rose to rule the hive. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, music that sounded like wind through crystal, food I could not pronounce the names of, and speeches from nobles who had spent weeks preparing them. Shireen told me it was tradition for the Queen to walk among her people that night without a full guard, a symbol of trust between ruler and ruled. I did not like it from the moment she explained it to me. With respect, I told her privately, 2 days before the feast, a tradition built on trust only works if everyone in the room actually deserves that trust. I do not think everyone in your court does. She almost smiled at that, though there was little humor left in her eyes those days. "You worry too much, Marcus Cole." "It is my job to worry," I said. "Let me stay close, not as a show of weakness, as a shadow, the way I always am." After some argument, she agreed, though she made me promise to stay unseen, blending into the edges of the hall rather than standing beside her throne like a soldier on duty. I agreed, but I made my own private promise as well. I would not let her out of my sight, no matter how far the shadows stretched. The night of the feast, the great hall of the Hive City was transformed. Glowing lanterns hung from the ceiling like captured stars, and long tables stretched from one end of the chamber to the other, filled with nobles in ceremonial robes of deep purple and silver. Music drifted through the air, strange and beautiful, played on instruments I had never seen before. For a moment, standing near the back wall in the shadows, I almost let myself believe that this world was at peace. Then I saw Vethrak. The captain of the guard was not standing at his usual post near the main doors. Instead, he stood near a side passage, speaking quietly with two soldiers I did not recognize, men who wore the insignia of the home guard rather than the palace guard. That alone was not unusual. What caught my attention was the way all three of them kept glancing toward the throne, then toward the main doors, then back again, like men checking the timing of something they had rehearsed. I moved closer, staying in the shadows along the wall, my hand resting near the sidearm hidden beneath my jacket. The weapon had been a gift from the Queen's own armorer, modified to fire the kind of energy rounds the Veil used, since earth weapons were forbidden inside the palace. I had trained with it every day since receiving it. I was grateful for that training now. I caught fragments of their conversation, words like signal and the general's order, and most chilling of all, a phrase I had heard whispered in the halls before: "End the peace before it ends us." I did not wait to hear more. I moved toward the throne, weaving between tables and dancing nobles, my eyes scanning every doorway, every guard, every shadow that seemed slightly too still. Shireen sat near the center of the hall, speaking warmly with an elderly noblewoman, unaware of the danger gathering at the edges of the room. I reached her side just as the music began to change, the melody twisting into something sharper, almost like a signal of its own. "Your Majesty," I said quietly, leaning close, "we need to leave. Now." She looked at me, surprised by the urgency in my voice. "Marcus, what is—" The great doors at the far end of the hall burst open before she could finish. Soldiers flooded into the room, dozens of them, wearing the black and silver colors of the home guard, weapons already raised. The music died in an instant, replaced by screams and the scraping of chairs as nobles scrambled away from the tables. At the front of the soldiers stood General Threx, his expression as calm and unreadable as ever, though his eyes burned with something I had not seen in him before. "Certainty. Queen Shireen Vale," he called out, his voice carrying easily over the chaos. "Your reign of weakness ends tonight." The hall erupted into panic. Nobles ran for exits that were already being blocked. Guards loyal to the Queen drew their weapons, only to be outnumbered 3-1 by soldiers who had clearly been planning this moment for a long time. I grabbed Shireen by the arm and pulled her down behind an overturned table, energy bolts sizzling through the air above us, scorching the crystal walls. "This is Threx's coup," she said, her voice tight with something between fear and fury. "He has moved against me at last." "We need another way out," I said, scanning the chamber. The main doors were lost to us, flooded with enemy soldiers. But I remembered something from my weeks of studying the palace layout, a service corridor behind the kitchens that led down toward the lower tunnels. "There," I said, pointing toward a narrow door half hidden behind a tapestry near the side of the hall. "That leads to the kitchens. From there, we can reach the lower levels." Shireen nodded, and we moved, staying low, using the overturned tables and fleeing nobles as cover. Energy bolts cracked against the walls around us, and more than once I felt the heat of a near miss against my skin. A soldier in Home Guard colors spotted us and raised his weapon, but I fired first, my shot catching him in the shoulder and knocking him back into a table of shattering glassware. We reached the hidden door, and I threw it open, pushing Sharin through ahead of me before slamming it shut and jamming a fallen chair beneath the handle. It would not hold long, but it would buy us seconds, and seconds were all we needed. The kitchens were empty, the staff having fled at the first sounds of fighting. Steam still rose from abandoned pots, and the smell of scorched food hung heavy in the air. I led Sharin through the maze of counters and ovens toward a service door at the back, my mind racing through everything I knew about the lower tunnels. "Where does this lead?" Sharin asked, her breathing hard as we moved. "Away from here," I said. "That is all that matters right now." We burst through the service door into a narrow stone corridor, lit by dim glowing fungus, the same kind that lit the gardens above. Behind us, I heard the crash of the barricaded door giving way, followed by shouted orders in the sharp, clicking Veil language. They had found our trail already. "Run," Sharin said suddenly, grabbing my arm and pulling me to a stop. Her eyes were wide, desperate, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw real terror on her face. Terror not for herself, but for me. "Marcus, listen to me. You are not bound to this fight. You are not Veil. Save yourself. Run, and do not look back." I looked at her for a long moment, at the fear in her eyes, at the trust she had placed in me despite everything her own people had taught her to believe about outsiders. I thought about the promise I had made to myself after my old unit fell, the promise that I would never again stand by while someone I was sworn to protect faced danger alone. "No," I said simply. "Marcus." I said no, I repeated, my voice steady, despite the sound of boots pounding closer through the corridor behind us. "You are not going to die tonight, Your Majesty. Not while I am still breathing. Now move, because we are not done running yet, and this time we are running together." For a moment, something passed between us that had no need for words, an understanding deeper than orders or duty, or even the treaty that had first brought me to this world. She nodded, and together we ran deeper into the tunnels beneath the hive city, the sound of Threx's soldiers growing louder behind us with every passing second. Somewhere above us, the ascension feast had become a battlefield, and the peace Sharin had fought so hard to build was hanging by a thread thinner than I dared to think about. But as long as I had breath in my body, I intended to make sure that thread did not break. The tunnels twisted and turned, carved from the same black stone as the palace above, though far rougher, clearly older, built long before the glowing city had risen on top of them. Sharin moved quickly despite her heavy ceremonial robes, and I stayed close behind her, my weapon drawn, my ears straining for any sound of pursuit. "These tunnels were built during the old wars," she explained breathlessly as we ran. "Escape routes for the royal family, in case the hive was ever overrun. I did not think I would ever need to use them." "Good thing they built them anyway," I said. We reached a junction where 3 tunnels split off in different directions, and Sharin hesitated, clearly trying to remember which path led where. Behind us, the sound of pursuit grew louder, boots echoing off stone walls, voices calling out orders. "This way," she finally said, choosing the leftmost tunnel. "It leads toward the lower storage caverns. From there, we can reach a maintenance shaft that rises near the outer wall." We ran on, and I found myself grateful for every hour of training I had put in since arriving on this world, every hour spent learning the layout of a palace I had never expected to need to escape from. The tunnel narrowed, forcing us to move in single file, the glowing fungus growing sparser, leaving stretches of near-total darkness. It was in one of those dark stretches that I heard it, a soft click, like a weapon being armed, coming from somewhere ahead of us rather than behind. "Down," I hissed, pulling Sharin behind a jutting outcrop of stone, just as an energy bolt lit up the darkness, scorching the wall where we had been standing a heartbeat before. They had anticipated our escape route. Soldiers waited ahead of us in the darkness, cutting off our path forward, while more closed in from behind. We were trapped between two forces, in a narrow stone tunnel deep beneath a mountain, with nowhere left to run. I looked at Shireen, at the fear and determination warring in her eyes, and made a decision that would define everything that came after. "Stay behind me," I said. "Whatever happens, stay behind me." She opened her mouth to argue, but the sound of approaching boots from both directions told us there was no time left for words. The soldiers ahead of us emerged from the darkness, weapons raised, and I understood in that moment that I was about to fight for a queen's life in a tunnel underneath an alien mountain, alone, outnumbered, with nothing but training and stubbornness on my side. I raised my weapon and stepped forward, placing myself firmly between Shireen and the approaching soldiers. "You will have to come through me first," I said, my voice echoing off the stone walls, steady despite the pounding of my own heart. The soldiers hesitated for just a moment, clearly surprised by the sight of a lone human standing his ground against overwhelming numbers. That moment of hesitation was all I needed. The fight was about to begin. I moved before they could recover from their surprise. My first shot caught the nearest soldier square in the chest, dropping him instantly. The second soldier fired back, the energy bolt scorching past my shoulder close enough to singe my jacket, but I was already rolling behind a stone outcrop, using the darkness of the tunnel as cover the way I had used shadows 100 times before, on 100 different battlefields back on Earth. "Stay down," I called back to Shireen, who had pressed herself flat against the tunnel wall, exactly where I had told her to wait. The narrow tunnel worked in my favor. The soldiers could not surround me, could not use their numbers the way they wanted to. They had to come at me one or two at a time, funneled through the same tight passage, and in that kind of fight, training mattered more than numbers. I fired twice more, dropping another soldier and forcing the rest to pull back around a bend in the tunnel, buying us precious seconds. "Behind us," Shireen said suddenly, and I turned to see the soldiers from the feast catching up, their lights bobbing in the darkness of the tunnel we had come from. We were caught between two groups now, exactly the trap I had feared. I grabbed Shireen's hand and pulled her toward a narrow side passage I had spotted earlier, barely wide enough for us to squeeze through single file. "This was not on the map," she said as we pushed into the cramped space. "Then let us hope Threx's soldiers do not know it either," I answered. The passage was tight and low, forcing us to crouch as we moved, but it opened after a short distance into a wider cavern, one filled with the soft glow of underground water reflecting the light of more fungus growing along the ceiling. It was beautiful, in a strange and haunting way, but I had no time to appreciate it. I could hear the soldiers searching the tunnels behind us, their voices growing more frustrated as they lost our trail. "We cannot stay here long," Shireen whispered. "Threx knows these tunnels almost as well as I do. He will find another way around." "Then we keep moving," I said. "Which way to that maintenance shaft you mentioned?" She pointed toward a narrow ledge running along the edge of the underground lake, leading toward a dark opening on the far side of the cavern. We moved quickly along the ledge, the water below us dark and still, reflecting the glowing ceiling like a mirror made of night sky. We were halfway across when the soldiers found us. They emerged from the passage we had just left, and this time there were more of them, at least 6, led by Vethrock himself. The captain's face, once merely cold toward me, now burned with open hostility. "The human should have run when he had the chance," Vethrock called out, his weapon raised. "Now he dies alongside a queen who has already lost her throne." "She has not lost anything yet," I called back, pushing Shireen behind me once more as we reached a narrower section of the ledge. "And I am still standing right here, so you will have to try harder than that." Vethrock gave the order, and his soldiers opened fire. I returned fire while pulling Shireen toward the cover of a stone pillar, rising from the cavern floor, energy bolts sizzling past us, some striking the water and sending up hissing clouds of steam. I felt a bolt graze my arm, a line of burning pain that I forced myself to ignore, focusing instead on returning fire, on counting my shots, on keeping myself between the soldiers and the queen at all costs. "Marcus, you are hurt," Sharin said, seeing the scorch mark on my sleeve. "It is nothing," I said, though the pain told a different story. "Focus on staying alive. That is the only thing that matters right now." We reached the far side of the cavern, ducking into the dark opening Sharin had pointed toward earlier, just as another volley of energy bolts scorched the stone behind us. The passage beyond led upward, a steep incline carved with rough steps, clearly older and less maintained than the tunnels we had passed through before. "The maintenance shaft is at the top of these stairs," Sharin said, already climbing. "It rises all the way to the outer wall of the hive city. From there we can reach the loyalist garrison at the northern gate." "How far is that garrison from here?" I asked, following close behind her, glancing back to check for pursuit. "Not far, if we can reach the surface," she said. "General Torin commands that garrison. He has always been loyal to my family, unlike Threx. If we can reach him, we may yet survive this night." We climbed for what felt like an eternity, my legs burning, my wounded arm throbbing with every movement, but I did not slow down, and neither did Sharin. Behind us, the sound of pursuit never quite faded, Vethrak's soldiers following our trail with grim determination, but the steep, narrow stairs slowed them just enough to keep us ahead. We finally emerged into a small maintenance chamber near the surface, filled with old equipment and thick with dust, clearly unused for years. A narrow shaft rose from the center of the room, a metal ladder bolted to its inner wall leading up toward a faint circle of starlight far above. "That leads to the outer wall," Sharin said, already moving toward the ladder. "Once we reach the top, we will be in the open air, close to the northern districts. From there, it is a short run to the garrison." I nodded, but before she could begin climbing, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Voices, coming from the passage below us, closer than I expected. Vethrak's soldiers had found the stairway faster than I had hoped. "Go," I said, pushing Sharin toward the ladder. "Climb. I will hold them here." "No," she said sharply, turning to face me. "I will not leave you behind, not after everything you have done tonight." "This is not the time to argue," I said, my voice firm, despite the fear rising in my chest. "You are the queen. Your survival matters more than mine. If Threx captures you, this rebellion succeeds, and everything you have built collapses. Climb that ladder, reach the garrison, and send help. That is an order, Your Majesty, and for once in your life, please listen to your guard." She stared at me for a long moment, torn between duty and something I could not quite name, something that had grown between us over these past weeks, without either of us acknowledging it out loud. Finally she nodded, though her eyes were wet with something that was not quite tears. "Do not die, Marcus Cole," she said quietly. "That is an order as well." "I will do my best," I said, managing something close to a smile despite the danger closing in around us. She climbed, and I turned to face the passage below, weapon raised, ready to buy her every second I could. The voices grew louder, boots pounding against stone, and then Vethrak himself emerged into the chamber, flanked by 4 soldiers, his eyes finding me immediately. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Somewhere you will never reach," I said, and raised my weapon. What followed was the hardest fight of my life. I used every trick I had ever learned, every scrap of training from years of service back on Earth, fighting in a cramped stone chamber against soldiers who outnumbered me and knew this mountain far better than I ever could. I fired from behind cover, moved constantly, never letting them settle into a rhythm, never giving them a clean shot. I took a bolt to the leg that nearly dropped me, but I forced myself upright, forced myself to keep fighting, because somewhere above me, Sharin was climbing toward safety, and every second I bought her mattered more than my own pain. I dropped 2 more soldiers before Vethrak finally closed the distance, knocking my weapon from my hand with a strike that sent pain shooting up my injured arm. We grappled in the dust and debris of that ancient chamber, and for a moment I thought it was over, that I had finally run out of tricks, out of strength, out of time. Then I remembered something my old commanding officer used to say. a lesson that had kept me alive through more battles than I could count. When you have nothing left to fight with what you have left anyway. I drove my elbow into Vethrak's side, breaking his grip just enough to reach the small blade hidden in my boot, a backup weapon I had carried since my very first day on this world. The fight that followed was brutal and short, and when it ended, I was standing, bruised and bleeding, but standing, while Vethrak lay unconscious on the chamber floor. The remaining soldiers, seeing their captain fallen, hesitated, and in that hesitation, I found the strength to grab my weapon from the floor and warn them off long enough to reach the ladder myself. I climbed with everything I had left, ignoring the pain in my leg and arm, focused only on the circle of starlight growing closer above me. When I finally pulled myself out into the cool night air atop the outer wall of the hive city, I found Sharin waiting for me, relief flooding her face the moment she saw me emerge. "You came," she said, as if she had genuinely doubted it. "I told you I would," I said, my voice rough with exhaustion. "Now let us reach that garrison before Threx realizes we have slipped through his fingers." We ran together across the outer wall, the glowing city spread out below us, smoke rising from the great hall where the feast had turned to chaos, distant shouts and the flash of weapons fire visible even from this distance. Somewhere down there, loyal guards were still fighting, still holding out against Threx's rebellion, and I intended to make sure their sacrifice was not wasted. The northern garrison came into view ahead of us, its gates still closed, its walls lined with soldiers watching the chaos unfolding across the city with grim, uncertain expressions. I did not know, as we ran toward those gates, whether the soldiers within would recognize their queen and open them, or whether this night would end with both of us cut down within sight of the very help we were racing toward. But I did know one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever happened next, I was not leaving her side. Not now, not ever. We reached the gates breathless, and for a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. The soldiers atop the wall stared down at us, weapons raised, uncertain whether the figures approaching in the darkness were friend or enemy. Then a voice rang out from above, sharp with recognition. "That is the Queen. Open the gates. Open them now." The great gates ground open just enough for us to slip through, and we were quickly surrounded by soldiers, though this time their weapons pointed outward, toward the city, rather than at us. A broad-shouldered officer pushed through the crowd, dropping to one knee the moment he saw Sharin, his expression a mixture of relief and horror at the state we were both in. "Your Majesty," he said, "we heard fighting at the palace. We feared the worst." "General Toran," Sharin said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Threx has moved against me. He has taken the Great Hall, and likely much of the palace guard with him. I need every loyal soldier you can gather, and I need them now." Toran rose, his jaw tight with anger. "Threx has spoken of rebellion for months, Your Majesty, but I did not believe he would move so openly, so soon. My garrison stands ready. Give the order, and we march." I stepped forward then, ignoring the pain still throbbing through my leg and arm. "Before you march anywhere, she needs medical attention, and so, frankly, do I. We cannot retake a palace with a queen who collapses halfway there." Toran glanced at me, clearly unsure what to make of a human speaking so directly in front of his queen, but Sharin nodded in agreement, and that was enough to settle the matter. We were brought inside the garrison walls, and for the first time in hours, I allowed myself to breathe. The medics who treated us worked quickly, their strange but effective tools closing the wound on my leg and cleaning the burn along my arm within minutes. Sharin, though shaken and bruised, had suffered no serious injuries during our escape, a fact that brought me more relief than I cared to admit even to myself. While the medics worked, Toran gathered his officers to plan the counterattack. I insisted on joining that meeting, and though a few of the older officers bristled at a human offering military advice, Sharin silenced their objections with a single sharp look. "Marcus Cole kept me alive tonight when soldiers I trusted turned against me," she said. "He has earned the right to speak in this room." The plan we developed was simple in concept, though dangerous in execution. Threx controlled the Great Hall and much of the central palace, but his forces were spread thin, having moved quickly to secure key positions rather than consolidating their strength. If Tauren's garrison struck swiftly, before Threx could rally the rest of the home guard to his cause, we might be able to retake the palace before the rebellion could fully take hold. "There is one more thing," I said, as the officers finalized their positions on a holographic map of the city. "Threx believes the Queen fled the city entirely, or at best is hiding somewhere within the tunnels. He does not know we reached this garrison. That gives us an advantage. Surprise." "What do you propose?" Tauren asked. "A direct strike at the Great Hall, timed with word spreading through the city that the Queen is alive and leading the counterattack herself," I said. "Threx's support is built on the idea that Sharon is weak, that she abandoned her people rather than fight for them. If every soldier and citizen in this city sees her standing at the front of this counterattack, alive, unbroken, and unafraid, his support will crumble faster than any battle could break it." Shireen looked at me for a long moment, understanding exactly what I was suggesting and the danger it carried for her personally. "You want me at the front of the attack," she said. "I want you visible," I corrected. "Not exposed, not reckless, but visible. Your people need to see their queen fighting for them, not hiding from the fight. That is how you win this war before it truly begins, by proving Threx's entire argument against you was a lie from the very start." She considered this for a long moment, and I watched the fear in her eyes slowly give way to something harder, something more determined. "Very well," she finally said. "We do this together, Marcus Cole, exactly as we have done everything else tonight." The counterattack began just before dawn. Tauren's soldiers moved through the city in disciplined formation, and word spread ahead of them exactly as I had hoped, whispered from window to window, doorway to doorway. "The Queen lives. The Queen fights." As we marched toward the palace, I watched citizens emerge from their homes, watched their expressions shift from fear to disbelief to something like hope as they saw Shireen walking at the front of the loyalist forces, flanked by soldiers, and by me. We reached the palace gates as the first light of dawn broke over the mountain, painting the black stone walls in shades of deep orange and gold. Threx's soldiers, stationed at the gates, hesitated the moment they saw their queen alive and leading an armed force toward them, exactly the reaction I had hoped for. Doubt was a powerful weapon, and we had brought plenty of it with us. "Lay down your weapons," Shireen called out, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard, stronger and steadier than I had ever heard it. "General Threx has led you into treason against your own queen, based on lies about my weakness and my supposed betrayal of our people. I stand before you now, alive, unbroken, and ready to fight for every soul in this hive. Choose now, stand with your queen, or stand with a traitor who fled from an honest fight rather than face me himself." For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, weapons began to lower. A young soldier near the front of Threx's forces stepped forward, dropping to one knee before Shireen, and within moments, dozens more followed his example. The rebellion, built on the lie of a queen too weak and too cowardly to fight for her people, collapsed the instant that lie was proven false in front of everyone. But Threx himself did not surrender so easily. He emerged from the great hall as his soldiers knelt around him, his expression a mixture of fury and disbelief at the sight of his rebellion crumbling before his eyes. He drew his weapon, not toward the crowd, but directly toward Shireen, and I moved without thinking, placing myself between them exactly as I had done all night. "This ends now, Threx," Shireen said, her voice steady despite the weapon aimed in our direction. "Look around you. Your soldiers have already made their choice. Will you die alone for a rebellion that has already failed, or will you face judgment like the general you once claimed to be?" Threx's hand trembled on his weapon, and for a terrible moment I thought he might fire anyway, might choose destruction over surrender. Then, slowly, his shoulders sagged, and the weapon fell from his grip, clattering against the stone courtyard. "You should have died in those tunnels," he said quietly, staring at me with something between hatred and grudging respect. "No human has ever fought like that for a Veil Queen." "Maybe that is exactly why she needed one," I said. Soldiers moved forward to restrain Threx, and as they led him away, I finally allowed myself to relax, the exhaustion of the past hours crashing over me all at once. Shireen turned to me, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw something in her eyes that had nothing to do with duty or politics or the careful distance a queen was supposed to keep from her guard. "You saved my life tonight," she said quietly, so only I could hear. "Not once, but many times over. I do not know how to repay a debt like that." "You do not owe me anything," I said. "I made a promise to myself a long time ago that I would never again stand by while someone I was sworn to protect fell because I hesitated. Tonight I kept that promise. That is repayment enough." She studied me for a long moment, and something passed between us again, that same wordless understanding from the tunnels beneath the palace. Deeper now, harder to ignore. "Perhaps," she said softly, "it is time this hive learned what it truly means to have a human as more than just a guard." I did not fully understand what she meant by that in the moment, exhausted and aching as I was, standing in a courtyard filled with kneeling soldiers and the wreckage of a rebellion we had somehow survived. But I would understand soon enough, in the days that followed, as the true cost and the true reward of that long, terrible night began to reveal themselves. For now, it was enough to know that she was alive, that the throne was hers once more, and that whatever came next, I would be standing beside her to face it. The weeks that followed the failed rebellion were unlike anything I had experienced since arriving on that mountain. The palace, once cold and suspicious toward me, began to feel different, though the change came slowly, one small moment at a time. General Threx was brought before a council of Veil elders to answer for his treason. I was not permitted to attend the trial itself, since it was considered a matter for Veil law alone, but Shireen told me afterward that Threx never denied his actions, never claimed innocence. He simply stated, again and again, that he had believed peace with humanity would weaken his people beyond saving. In the end, the council stripped him of his rank and exiled him to the outer colonies, a punishment Shireen herself had argued for, over calls from some nobles for something far harsher. Death would have made him a martyr, she explained to me one evening, as we walked once more through the glowing gardens beneath the palace. Exile makes him a warning instead, a reminder of what happens when fear is allowed to grow unchecked. I found myself agreeing with her reasoning, though I said nothing, simply listening as she spoke, the way I had learned to do over these past months. There was a comfort in these evening walks now that had not existed before that terrible night in the tunnels, a comfort built not on duty but on something we had earned together, standing back to back against soldiers who wanted us both dead. Vethrak, the captain who had once told me I would not last a season, survived his injuries from our fight in the maintenance chamber. When he recovered enough to stand trial alongside the other soldiers who had joined the rebellion, I expected him to show the same defiance Threx had shown. Instead, he asked to speak with me privately before his sentencing. "I underestimated you," he said, standing before me in a small holding chamber deep within the palace, his usual pride replaced by something more thoughtful. "I believed humans were soft, that you would break at the first sign of real danger. I was wrong. You fought harder for our queen than most of my own soldiers did." "I was not fighting for your queen," I said honestly, "not at first. I was fighting because I made a promise to myself, a long time ago, that I would not fail someone again the way I failed the people I served with back on Earth. Shireen simply happened to be the person that promise applied to that night." Vethrak considered this for a long moment. "Perhaps that is the difference between us," he said finally. "My people fight for duty, for bloodlines, for the weight of tradition. You fought for a promise made to yourself, and somehow that promise proved stronger than every blade in that palace. I find myself with new respect for a species I once dismissed as weak." His sentencing, when it came, was lighter than many expected, a demotion rather than exile, a second chance he seemed determined to earn. I did not know, at the time, whether his change of heart was genuine or simply the words of a soldier trying to save his own future. But over the following weeks, I watched him rebuild the palace guard with real dedication, and slowly, cautiously, I allowed myself to believe he meant every word. The nobles who had supported Threx's rebellion, either openly or through quiet whispers in shadowed corners, found their influence within the court dramatically reduced. Sha'rin moved carefully but decisively, replacing suspect advisors with those who had proven their loyalty during the crisis, strengthening her position in ways that made a second attempted coup far less likely to succeed. Word of what had happened that night spread quickly, not just through the Hive City, but across the wider Vale Empire, and eventually, back to Earth itself. I received a message from the Human Diplomatic Office weeks later, informing me that the story of a human guard who had refused to abandon an alien queen, even when she herself ordered him to run, had become something of a legend among both species. The peace treaty that had once hung by a thread now stood on far stronger ground, strengthened rather than weakened by the crisis it had survived. I found myself, somewhat to my own surprise, becoming something of a bridge between two worlds that had barely understood each other before. Vale soldiers who once eyed me with suspicion now sought me out for training, curious about human combat techniques that had allowed one man to hold a choke point against overwhelming odds. Human diplomats who visited the Hive City treated me with a respect I had never received back on Earth, where I had been considered damaged, expendable, forgotten. But it was the quiet moments with Sha'rin that mattered most to me, more than any legend or diplomatic success. Our evening walks through the gardens became a regular ritual, something neither of us spoke about directly, but something we both clearly looked forward to. She began asking me about Earth, about my life before the treaty, about the family and friends I had left behind, and I found myself sharing things I had not spoken about in years, things I had buried deep enough that I had almost forgotten they still hurt. "You never speak of returning home," she observed one evening as we sat together near the edge of a glowing pool, the soft light reflecting in her shifting eyes. "This is home now," I said, and I realized, as I said the words, that I meant them completely. Or at least, it has become something close enough to home that I no longer feel the pull to leave. She was quiet for a long moment, studying the water rather than looking at me directly. "The council has been discussing a new position within the court," she finally said. "Something beyond guard duty, a permanent advisor on matters between our two peoples, someone who understands both worlds, who has proven his loyalty beyond any doubt." "Are you offering me a promotion, Your Majesty?" I asked, unable to keep a small smile from my voice. "I am offering you a choice," she said, finally looking up to meet my eyes. "You could return to Earth, your duty here fulfilled, your debt to me repaid many times over, or you could stay, not simply as my guard, but as something more permanent. Something this hive, and perhaps this entire empire, still needs, now more than ever." I thought about my old life on Earth, about the emptiness that had waited there for me before this assignment began, about the promise I had made to myself in the darkest days after my old unit fell. I thought about the tunnels beneath this palace, about the fight in that maintenance chamber, about the moment she had told me to run and I had refused. "I already made my choice," I said quietly. "I made it the moment you told me to run, and I chose to stay instead. I do not intend to change that choice now." Something in her expression softened, something that looked almost like relief, though pride kept her from showing it too openly. "Then it is settled," she said. "Marcus Cole, human guard of the Vale Empire, will become something far more important in the days ahead." The formal ceremony took place a month later, in the same great hall where the rebellion had first erupted, now fully restored, its crystal walls polished until they gleamed like captured starlight. I stood before the assembled court, Vale nobles who had once looked at me with suspicion, now watching with something closer to respect, as Sha'rin formally named me advisor to the throne, a bridge between two species who had nearly lost the chance to understand each other before that chance had barely begun. Vethrak stood near the front of the assembled guards, giving me a nod that carried more meaning than words ever could. Torin, now elevated to command the full palace guard, stood at attention nearby, his earlier doubts about a human's place in this court long since replaced by genuine respect. Even some of the nobles who had once whispered against the treaty in shadowed corners now offered cautious smiles, recognizing, perhaps for the first time, that strength did not always look the way tradition had taught them to expect. After the ceremony, as the hall slowly emptied and the glowing lanterns dimmed toward evening, Shireen found me standing near the same spot where Threx had once tried to end her reign in fire and betrayal. "Do you regret your choice?" she asked quietly, the two of us alone now in the vast hall, the events of that terrible night feeling both impossibly distant and painfully close all at once. "Not for a single moment," I said honestly. "You told me to run that night, and I refused, and I would refuse again 1,000 times over, in 1,000 different battles, if it meant standing here, now, with you safe and this peace still standing between our peoples." She smiled then, a real smile, one that reached all the way to her strange, beautiful eyes. "Then perhaps," she said softly, "the true beginning of this story was never the war we survived, but the choice you made when everyone, including myself, expected you to run away instead." I thought about that for a long moment, about the strange path that had brought a broken, forgotten soldier from Earth to this glowing mountain city, to a throne room filled with alien nobles, to a queen who had somehow become more important to me than any duty or treaty ever could. I thought about promises kept, about trust earned rather than given, about the simple, stubborn refusal to abandon someone worth protecting, no matter the cost. "Perhaps you are right," I said finally, "but I suspect this story is far from finished, Your Majesty. There are still empires to build, peace to protect, and no shortage of enemies who would see it all collapse given half a chance." "Then it is fortunate," she said, "that I have a guard who refuses to run, no matter how many times I ask him to." Outside the great hall, the mountain city glowed softly beneath a sky full of unfamiliar stars, a fragile peace between two worlds, standing a little stronger than it had before, built not on treaties and diplomacy alone, but on the simple, powerful truth that some bonds, once forged in fire, cannot easily be broken. And as for me, I had finally found something I had stopped believing I would ever find again after those dark days following my old unit's betrayal. I had found a place where I belonged, a purpose worth fighting for, and a promise I intended to keep for as long as I drew breath. Whatever storm still waited on the horizon for the Vale Empire and its fragile new peace with Earth, I would be standing right there beside my queen when they arrived, exactly where I had chosen to stand since the night she first whispered for me to run, and I had simply, quietly, and completely refused.